The first thing Leon noticed was the smell of polish on the grand piano, sharp and sweet, mixed with old cigarette smoke and damp carpet. The second thing was the silver case on the boss's desk, catching a slice of weak afternoon light. And the third thing was his own hand freezing over the keys like it had struck ice. He was in the Casino Hotel's private salon, a room with velvet curtains, brass lamps, and a tired view of the spa park outside. Borowiec had hired him because old men with tuning forks looked safe, quiet, harmless, the kind of person you could forget before he reached the door. Leon had built his whole life around that mistake. Half-deaf, careful, small in the shoulders, carrying his little tool roll and saying, "Yes, sir, no problem. Just let me listen." That was the mask. The silver case sat open by the ashtray, right beside a fountain pen and a stack of hotel ledgers. It was chipped at the corner. One clasp was bent, and cut into the lid, deep enough to catch the light, were the initials K.M. Not his son's, his grandson's, Kacper's. Leon didn't move at first. He kept one hand on the tuning lever and stared at the case as if the room had quietly lied to him. Weeks ago, Kacper had gone out with a bookkeeping folder. Just a quick errand, nothing dangerous, nothing that should have ended in a missing person poster and a phone that never rang again. And there it was now, on Borowiec's desk, in a room that smelled like money and aftershave and closed doors. Something old and ugly and very awake turned over inside him. He leaned a little closer, just enough to see the scratch on the lid, the one Kacper had made as a boy trying to open it with a coin. Leon had seen that scratch 100 times, at family dinners, on benches, in kitchens, on the edge of a river where Kacper once pretended to smoke because he thought it made him look grown. Leon had snapped at him then, angry for no reason, and the memory hit harder than any blow. Because now the case wasn't a memory, it was evidence. Borowiec was standing by the window, talking low into a phone, his back turned. Two men in cheap suits lingered near the hall door. They watched Leon, but only the way people watch furniture being moved. Leon could almost hear what they thought. Old man, piano man, deaf in one ear, won't notice a thing. He let that thought stay in the room. Then, very slowly, he lowered the lever, took his cloth from the piano bench, and wiped his fingers clean. Under the cuff of his shirt, just where the sleeve rode up, the old brand sat against his skin like a burned-in memory. He did not touch it. He didn't need to. It was already stirring. On the desk, the engraved cigarette case waited like a message from a dead man. And Leon, the invisible tuner nobody in that hotel would ever fear, understood one thing with perfect clarity. Kacper had not disappeared on his own. If you want the rest of this story, subscribe and stay close. Leon kept his eyes on the piano after that, because staring any longer at the desk would have given him away. He set the tuning lever down with care, listened through the hiss in his bad ear, and let the room keep pretending it was normal. The hotel manager was still on the phone by the window. The two men in the hall were still posted there like expensive furniture, and the cigarette case sat under the lamp, silver and innocent, like it had always belonged in a place with clean linen and bad intentions. That was the first lie. The second was that Leon was harmless. The boss had written him off the second he walked in. Most people did. Old coat, stiff knees, one ear half gone, a little leather bag in his hand. A man like that is easy to underestimate in a place built on money and quiet threats. Leon knew the type. He had used that look himself, back when he needed people to stop looking too closely. He took a few more notes off the top register, gentle, steady, and listened to the room around the piano instead of the piano itself. The salon had a low hum from the air vents, a faint rattle in the chandelier chain, footsteps softening on carpet outside. Borowiec's place was dressed up like a resort, all warm lights and polished wood. but underneath it had the feel of a machine that never stopped chewing. When the manager finally put the phone down, Leon asked for water in that mild, apologetic voice old men use when they've been trained not to take up space. The manager waved a hand. "Grab it from the sideboard." Sideboard. Sure. That was where the keys were hanging too, and the guest ledger, and a silver ashtray full of long, expensive stubs. Leon crossed the room slowly, limping just enough to sell the costume. Up close he could smell bourbon, floor wax, and the sour edge of cold sweat under cologne. He poured himself a glass, but his eyes never left the desk. The engraved cigarette case had a scratch along the hinge. Kacper used to worry silver with a coin when he was nervous. He did that on purpose, like a little private storm. Leon had told him once to stop fussing with it. Kacper had grinned and done it harder. The memory punched clean through him. Not rage, not yet. First came the old training, deep in the bones, the part that counted exits before it counted grief. Leon let his hand rest on the sideboard while his mind built the room into a map. Door at his back, hallway to the left, manager by the window, 2 men outside, 1 camera above the arch. No dead angle unless you use the piano lid as cover. The invisible tuner, they would have called him once, if anybody in that hotel had known what he used to do for a living. He took a sip of water, set the glass down, and turned slightly so the sleeve pulled back just enough to show the pale scar under his cuff. Enough for him to feel it wake up. Then the manager came over and tapped the desk with 2 fingers. "You almost done?" Leon looked at the cigarette case one more time. "Depends," he said. "Did you find that there yourself?" The man frowned. "Find what?" And that was when Leon noticed something else. The desk drawer was open a finger's width, and inside it sat a thin stack of envelopes bound with a rubber band, each one marked with the same neat accounting code. Borowiec's hand. Too neat. Too clean. The kind of neatness that hides blood in columns. Leon smiled just a little, the way old men do when they've been asked a stupid question, because now he knew where the hotel's real money lived. And when the side corridor door opened a moment later, he caught one word from the passing clerk, just one, barely more than breath through the noise in his ear. "Count room." By the time Borowiec finally shut up and turned back toward the window, Leon already had the room measured in his head. He finished the last adjustment by feel, one hand on the lever, the other steadying the frame, while the salon kept its soft little lies going. The chandelier hummed, the carpet swallowed footsteps. Somewhere in the corridor, a tray clinked once against glass and then went quiet. Leon listened through the hiss in his bad ear and let the word he'd caught a moment ago settle into place. Count room. That was where the clean clothes ended and the dirty money began. Borowiec moved off with his phone still in hand, and the 2 men at the hall door shifted just enough to show they were bored, not relaxed. Leon bowed his head like an old craftsman finishing a job, wiped the key with his cloth, and put everything back in the case with slow, almost clumsy care. Nobody watched him closely. Why would they? He looked like a man whose biggest problem was a stiff back. That kind of mistake has cost men a lot more than pride. Outside, the spa town had already gone gray at the edges. The old promenade smelled of wet stone, cheap perfume from the hotel entrance, and the mineral steam drifting up from the bathhouse vents. Leon walked home without hurry, his shoes tapping a patient rhythm on the pavement, and all the while his mind stayed in that salon upstairs. The desk, the ashtray, the envelopes, the neat little codes on the paper bands. A money-laundering count room hidden inside a resort that smiled for the tourists. When he got to his house, he didn't turn on the main light. He crossed the kitchen in the dark, set the tuner's case on the table, and opened the little drawer under the bread box. The wood stuck for a second. then gave with a dry scrape. Inside were the things he had kept from another life. Not much. A folded service card with the corners softened by time. A spare key that opened nothing in any normal house. A slim black notebook wrapped in rubber. Pages marked with numbers, initials, and old roots he had not used in years. And beneath all that, tucked flat against the drawer bottom, the dull metal badge that had once told the world who he was when the world still had a name for men like him. He sat very still. The brand under his cuff burned cold against his wrist when he rolled the sleeve back. Same mark, same pale scar. He touched it once with 2 fingers, not out of sentiment, just checking that it was still there. It was. Of course it was. Things like that don't vanish because you decide to grow old. Leon opened the black notebook and found, on the last clean page, a list of safe houses and dead drops crossed out one by one. Most of the ink had faded to brown, but one line was still sharp. A maintenance entrance on the hotel side. A key code route. A note beside it in his own hand from years ago. Service lift, lower level. No cameras at the turn. He stared at that for a long second, then closed the notebook and leaned back in the chair. The kettle on the stove gave a tiny metallic tick as it cooled. Somewhere outside, a car passed with wet tires hissing on the road. Leon was just reaching for the service badge when the kitchen phone rang once, hard and sudden in the dark. Not the house line, the old line in the hall. The one nobody used unless they wanted the person on the other end to answer fast. He looked at the receiver, then at the notebook, and picked up on the first ring. Leon answered on the first ring, and the line gave him a breath of cheap static before a woman's voice came through, clipped and nervous, the way people sound when they are trying not to be heard. "Mr. Leon, this is reception. Borowiec says the piano needs another look tonight. He wants you back after 9. He said nothing at first. Around him, the kitchen was dark, except for the stove clock and the yellow slice of street light under the curtain. He could hear the tick of cooling metal, the soft click in his bad ear, and the faint rush of traffic outside on wet pavement. The hotel calling him back so fast meant one thing. They had noticed something, or they wanted to see what he would do next. The woman on the line cleared her throat. "There's also a service note. Someone left it under the desk for you." When Leon looked down, there it was, a narrow envelope, shoved halfway under his own door, with one clean finger mark on the front, like whoever delivered it had been in a hurry. He opened it with his thumbnail. Inside was a single key card, a folded scrap of hotel stationery, and 3 words in block letters. Bathhouse entrance, lower level. No signature. Leon held the card between 2 fingers and read the note again, because he did. Someone inside Borowiec's place was giving him a route, and that meant somebody else was already afraid enough to take a risk. He hung up, pulled on his coat, and checked the old notebook once more. The service entrance he had marked years ago still matched the building plan in his head. The blind camera turn, the laundry corridor, the lift that creaked only when it was loaded. A man like Leon does not get old by rushing. He gets old by knowing which doors are watched and which ones only look watched. If you've ever stood in a hotel after midnight, you know the silence is fake. Pipes talk, refrigerators hum. Somewhere far above, music leaks through walls and becomes a dull pulse in the bones. He crossed the promenade with his head down, breath turning white in the cold. The spa town smelled of mineral steam and old leaves, and the casino hotel rose through that fog like a polished lie. At the bathhouse side door, the key card worked. A green light blinked once. Leon slipped inside and shut the door behind him with 2 careful fingers. The basement corridor was all tile, bleach, and damp wool. A laundry cart sat abandoned near the wall, one wheel still twitching. Leon kept to the edge of the overhead light and moved past a camera whose red indicator had been taped over with a square of black plastic. That told him the place was lazy, not clean. Lazy men always leave a seam. A guard stood by the lower-level door, half-turned, checking his phone with the bored face of someone paid to watch an empty hallway. Leon came up behind him without noise. One hand locked the wrist, the other pressed high under the arm and turned the man's balance inside out. It was a small movement, almost gentle. The guard folded at the waist, hit the tiles on one knee, and then leaned hard into the wall with a wet gasp. Leon took the keycard from his pocket and let it dangle where the guard could see it. "You should have looked at the door," he said. The guard tried to speak, but his breath came wrong, tight and thin. Leon eased him down, not caring whether he liked it or not, and in the scuffed shine of the corridor floor, he saw a fresh smear of heel marks leading straight to the steel door at the end of the hall. Beside it lay a cheap plastic comb with one broken tooth. Kacper used to carry one like that. Leon bent, picked it up, and felt the damp oil of someone else's pocket on the teeth. Then, from behind the steel door, came the softest sound. A cough, young and rough, cut short as if someone inside had heard him too. Leon did not knock again. He slid the keycard through the reader, waited for the green blink, and eased the steel door open just enough to slip inside. The air hit him first, warm and sour, with bleach under it and the wet metal smell of pipes sweating in the walls. The corridor beyond was narrower than it should have been, lined with stacked crates, folded linens, and two humming compressors that made the floor throb under his shoes. The cough came again, this time from somewhere deeper in the service maze. Young, raw, cut short quick, like the throat behind it had been told to stay quiet. Leon closed the door behind him and stood still, listening through the half-deafness, letting the building talk to him. A drip ticked somewhere in the dark. A fan rattled. Far off above his head, the hotel's music thudded through concrete like a muffled pulse. He moved past a wall of detergent drums and found the first real seam in Borowiec's polished lie. Not a hotel corridor now, a working passage. Burn marks around a fuse box, fresh rubber scuffs on the tiles. A trolley wheel mark turning hard to the left toward an old maintenance room that had been locked from the inside and opened too many times to stay clean. Leon touched the door frame, and his fingers came away with black soot and a smear of something sticky that had dried thin and brown. Blood. Not enough to panic over, enough to know he was close. Inside the maintenance room, a bare bulb buzzed over a folding chair, a mop sink, and a shelf packed with cable reels. Somebody had left a paper cup half crushed in the corner. On the chair sat a cheap burner phone and a hotel ledger page torn straight out, the kind used for counts and transfers. Leon picked it up. The figures were neat, almost elegant. Room numbers on one side, cash drops on the other. Below them, in a different hand, were initials and a word he had not expected to see yet. K.M. Kacper's hand had written that, or somebody wanted Leon to think it had. He stared at the page a moment longer, then folded it and put it inside his coat. If you've ever wondered how a room can turn dangerous without anyone raising a voice, that was how. Not with shouting, with paper, with names, with a line that tells you the whole building has been keeping a second set of books. The phone on the chair lit up once, no ringtone. Just a screen flare, then a message preview from an unknown number. Lower level isn't enough. Ask for the count room key. Leon looked at the screen, then at the dark hallway behind him. Somewhere in the hotel, somebody had his number now. Somebody had seen him enter the wrong door and decided to steer him deeper. He put the burner phone in his pocket, rolled his sleeve down over the scar under his cuff, and listened to the cough again. This time it came from farther away, and a second sound followed it, the scrape of a chair being dragged across tile. Leon read the message twice, Then a third time, because the first two times his mind wanted to turn it into something safer. Lower level isn't enough. Ask for the count room key. No signature, no joke, just a shove from inside the building, and that was enough to tell him somebody had either seen too much or was desperate enough to burn their own cover. Leon slipped the burner phone into his pocket and stood in the maintenance room with the bleach smell in his nose and the hum of the bare bulb above him. Through the wall came another cough, weaker this time, and then the scrape he had heard before, slow and dragged, as if somebody were trying to move without giving away how badly they hurt. That changed the shape of the room. It was no longer a hiding place. It was a hinge. Leon pulled the torn ledger page from his coat and flattened it on the shelf under the light. Room numbers, cash drops, little neat sums that made the hotel feel less like a resort and more like a mouth with teeth. He traced the margins with one finger and found the pencil mark on the back, a tiny notation in a hand even older than the entries. Service lift, lower level, no cameras at the turn. His own handwriting. The invisible tuner, he thought, not for the first time. The man nobody sees until the note is already out of tune. He checked the door, then the lock, then the corridor seam above the frame. Nothing moving. The hotel was still lying low, still pretending to be a place where people came for mineral baths and quiet weekends. Leon rolled his sleeve down, hiding the brand under his cuff, and stepped back into the corridor with the kind of calm that comes from doing worse things for less reason. At the end of the passage, the service lift waited behind a slatted gate. The brass plate beside it had been polished until the numbers blurred. Leon pressed his ear to the metal door. Nothing from inside. Then, very faintly, a breath. A person. He let his hand rest on the frame and listened again. 2 men, maybe 3, somewhere lower down. One had a shoe with a split sole. Every shift of weight gave it a dry rasp. Another kept tapping something hard against his palm, a ring or a key, too regular to be an accident. Borowiec's people, or the people Borowiec paid to stand where they couldn't be seen. The building was narrowing around him, channeling everything toward the same choke point. Leon smiled without showing his teeth. He reached into his coat, took out the key card, and held it for a second in his palm like he was weighing a coin. Then he looked at the lift gate, the dead camera above it, and the tiny smear of grime on the floor where carts had turned too often. Somebody had used this route recently. Not staff, not clean hands. Someone carrying fear, or cash, or both. From the far side of the steel door, a voice muttered, low and annoyed. Not Leon's. Not the phone voice either. Fresh. Close. And then came the second sound, a key sliding into a lock down below. Leon stopped with his hand on the lift gate and listened. The key sliding into the lock below had been followed by a soft metal click, then the tiny groan of a latch under weight. Somebody was opening the lower access from the other side. Not staff. Staff moved faster. This was careful, stiff. A man who expected to find trouble and still wanted a quiet entrance. Leon lowered his shoulder and took one step back from the gate. The corridor was narrow enough that a body would have nowhere to go if the door opened toward him. That was useful. He let the silence stretch, counted 2 breaths, and then set his fingers on the brass slats. The hotel's machinery hummed all around him, but beneath it he could hear another sound now, faint and close, like cloth brushing concrete. The door at the bottom clicked again. A voice, low and irritated. You said nobody was here. Another voice answered, thinner. There wasn't supposed to be. Leon moved then, not fast, just exact. He slid along the wall to the side of the gate where the angle hid him from the first look-through. His mind worked the same way it always had when a room turned hostile. No anger, no hurry, only a list. Door swing, foot placement, breath rhythm, distance to the hinge. The years fell away cleanly when he needed them to. The lift cage shuddered once and began to rise. That surprised him. So they were bringing something up, not checking the passage. Leon's eyes narrowed. He saw it in pieces before it arrived. A yellowed light, the edge of a cart, the corner of a black bag with a zipper half open. Not luggage, too small, too soft-sided. Then the cage stopped level with the landing and the gate rattled as somebody yanked it open from inside. Two men stood there, one broad, shaved head, hotel jacket open over a shoulder holster. The other in a gray coat, thinner, face pinched with annoyance. Between them sat a wheeled laundry cart stacked high with folded towels. The top towel had a stain on it that was too dark to be wine. They saw Leon at the same second he saw them. The broad one reached first, but Leon was already inside the motion. He took the wrist, turned it inward, and let the man's own forward step wreck his balance. The shoulder hit the wall with a dull crack. Not enough to break, enough to sting, hard and short. The thinner one backed up, one hand going for his waistband, eyes widening with the sudden private panic of a man whose plan has become a body in front of him. Leon drove his elbow into the soft seam under the ribs. It folded the man over the cart. Air went out in one rough grunt. Leon caught the falling head with his palm and redirected it into the metal frame, just enough to blur the eyes. Clinical, clean, no waste. Then he looked at the black bag. The zipper was open far enough to show the corner of a notebook, a strip of tape, and a silver chain. Kacper's chain. Leon's jaw tightened so hard it ached. He reached into the bag, not to grab blindly, but to confirm. The chain was real, warm from being handled. Beside it lay a folded hotel napkin with a room number written on the back, and one word beneath it, hurried and pressed hard into the paper. Upstairs. The broad man gave a wet cough and tried to lift his head. Leon straightened slowly, chain in his fist, and looked toward the dark stairwell beyond the lift. From above came another sound, one he knew too well, the kind that changes a corridor without changing anything visible at all. A metal lock being turned from the inside. And then, through the floor above him, a boy's voice, thin, hoarse, and unmistakably alive. Leon shoved the laundry cart sideways and jammed it against the lift gate before the cage could settle again. The broad man inside tried to lunge forward, but the cart caught his knee and stole the angle from him. Leon used that half second, took the man by the wrist, and turned him hard enough that the shoulder slammed the wall with a flat crack. The thinner one bent over the cart, coughing through his teeth, one hand clawing at his waistband and finding nothing useful. Leon didn't give him the chance to recover. He drove the heel of his palm under the ribs, felt the air rush out of the man in one rough burst, then let him fold over the rail like wet laundry. The chain in Leon's fist was still warm. He slipped it into his coat and rolled his sleeve down over the brand under his cuff. Not for style, just habit. Old habits kept men alive when newer ones were too slow. Then he looked at the lift cage, at the two men, at the hallway behind him, and chose the stairs. Not the public stairs, the service stairs, the narrow concrete run that smelled of detergent, steam, and old fryer grease. If you've ever been in a hotel after midnight, you know the quiet is fake. Pipes talk, fans chatter. Somebody always drops something soft and heavy in the distance. Leon climbed with one hand on the rail and the other loose at his side, listening through the half-deafness for the small mistakes people make when they think they're alone. Up ahead, two voices carried through a cracked fire door. Told you the old one was a problem. He's just a tuner. No, he isn't. That was enough. Not the words, the tone. Men arguing in that tight, nervous way that means orders are no longer enough. Leon paused at the landing and let his breathing settle. His mind did what it had always done, counted steps, measured pauses, mapped the shape of fear by the sound of shoes on tile. One man pacing, one man standing still, maybe three beyond the door, if the echoes were honest. The building was becoming a machine again, and he was still the invisible tuner inside it. The upper corridor was narrower than the one below, lined with stacked sheets and a wheeled linen bin shoved under a flickering lamp. The air was hotter here, drier. It carried cigarette smoke now and something sour underneath it, like old coffee left in a pot too long. Leon moved past a taped-over camera and stopped at a door marked "Storage" in faded paint. A fresh scratch ran down the frame, not from a trolley, from fingernails, maybe. Someone had been locked in or pulled out hard. Then he heard it again, not through a wall this time, right behind the door. A thin, cracked voice, young, alive. "Leon?" He went still. For 1 second, he didn't move at all. The whole floor seemed to hold its breath with him. Then the voice came again, weaker, but clear enough to land where it hurt most. "Granddad?" Leon closed his eyes once, just once, and put his hand on the knob. Behind the door, something metallic shifted. A chair scraped. And from somewhere farther inside the room, a man said, very calmly, "Don't open that yet." Leon opened the door only wide enough to take the room in without giving himself away. It was a storage room the hotel had lied about and failed to clean. Hanging sheets on a rail, a single bulb swinging over a scarred table, boxes of detergent stacked to the ceiling, and there, tied to a hard-back chair with plastic strips biting his wrists, sat Kacper. Pale, shaved at the jaw, one cheek split where a knuckle or a wall had found him. His eyes were open, and for one stupid heartbeat, Leon thought the boy might vanish again if he blinked. A skinny man in a gray sweater stood behind him with a box cutter loose in one hand. "Don't," the man said, very softly, like he still had a choice in the matter. "Borowiec said no noise." Leon didn't answer. He only looked at the lanyard on the man's neck. A hotel pass, a brass key, and clipped beneath it, dangling against the sweater, the little stamped tag for the money-laundering count room. That was the real prize in the room, not the blade, not the boy. That key had a life of its own now. The man flicked the box cutter up. Leon stepped in, caught the wrist, and turned it hard against the doorframe. The blade skated free and slapped the tile. The man's shoulder followed the motion a fraction too far, joint compressed, body folding in on itself with a dry grunt. Leon drove his elbow into the top of the collarbone, not to shatter it, just to kill the arm. The pressure took the man off his feet. He hit the floor on one knee, then the side of his face, and stayed there making small animal sounds through his teeth. "You took your time," Kacper rasped. Leon crouched beside him, cut the plastic strips with a stolen blade, and rubbed life back into the boy's wrists with the heel of his hand. They were red and swollen, the skin raw where the ties had eaten in. Up close, Kacper smelled of bleach, old sweat, and the sour shock that stays in a person after fear has burned too long. "You're alive," Leon said. Kacper gave a small, crooked nod. "For now." Leon took the lanyard, the key, and the folded floor plan from the man on the floor. The paper was damp with sweat at one corner. It showed the service stairs, the lift, and a neat circle around a room marked "Lower Office." That meant somebody upstairs had decided the papers mattered more than the boy, or maybe they thought they could have both. Kacper swallowed hard and pointed with his chin toward the ceiling. "They moved the ledgers up after the first drop went missing. Borowiec wants the office, not this room. He thinks the count room is safe if nobody sees the numbers." Leon tucked the floor plan away. The brand under his cuff throbbed once, a dull old ache under the skin, like a memory trying to wake up with him. He looked at the boy, at the raw wrists, at the room that had become a cage by paperwork and fear, and felt the old shape of himself settle into place again. Procedure. "Can you walk?" he asked. Kacper tried to stand and nearly folded at the knee. Leon caught him before he hit the floor. "Yeah," the boy said, breathing through the pain. "If I don't have to do it fast." Then the room phone on the shelf gave one sharp ring. Neither of them moved. The skinny man on the floor stopped groaning. Leon stared at the black receiver, then at the little glowing display beside it. An internal extension. The number matched the one on the floor plan, and the phone rang again. Leon caught the ring on the third note and killed the sound by covering the receiver with his palm. It was Borowiec's line. He knew that because nobody else in the hotel spoke into a phone like they owned the room before the call even connected. Leon glanced once at Kacper, then at the skinny man still bent on the floor, and made the decision in the same flat instant he'd made 100 other decisions in another life. "Hold still," he said to the boy, and then he lifted the receiver. Borowiec didn't waste breath on greetings. "Where are you?" Leon kept his voice mild, old, dusty, the kind of voice that made men relax without noticing they'd done it. "Fixing a lock." A pause, then a small, suspicious silence. "I didn't send you to locks," Borowiec said. "No," Leon answered. "You sent me to a piano, but the hotel keeps changing the job." That earned him a sharper pause, the kind that means the other side has started counting possibilities. Leon let it breathe. He could hear movement in the background through the line, a chair leg scraping, a muttered instruction, maybe two men talking over each other. Not a clean room. Good. Clean rooms were for people who believed their own press. Borowiec finally said, "Bring the ledger back upstairs. Alone." Leon looked at Kacper again. The boy's face had gone pale with effort, but his eyes were steady. Too steady for someone who'd been locked in a room and treated like inventory. The boy gave him the smallest shake of the head. Don't trust it. Leon didn't need the warning. He had made a career out of hearing the lie under the sentence. "I'm on my way," he said, and hung up. He handed Kacper the little metal key from the lanyard, then took the chain with the count room tag and snapped it once around his own fingers. "Can you walk now?" "Yeah," Kacper said, though the word hit air like it hurt. "If you stop trying to carry the whole place." Leon almost smiled at that. Almost. He wiped the sweat from the boy's wrist with a plastic had bit into the skin, then checked the door, the hall, the ceiling corner. The storage room had only one exit, which meant they were already being boxed in. That was fine. Boxes had seams. He reached down, picked up the fallen box cutter, and opened the blade a notch. Not for drama, for utility. The skinny man on the floor looked up, eyes watering. "Borowiec is not gonna..." Leon crouched beside him, close enough that the man could smell the soap on his coat. "I know exactly what Borowiec is going to do." Then he cut the lanyard from the man's neck, stripped the hotel pass, and left him breathing on the tile with nothing useful left in his hands. Kacper pushed himself upright. He was thinner than Leon had imagined in the dark, all elbows and tight jaw, but alive, and that mattered more than the rest. Leon set one hand at his back and moved him toward the door. Outside, the corridor was empty for the first 6 steps. Then a door at the far end opened 2 inches and shut again. Somebody had seen them. Leon stopped, listened, and heard the first soft thud of shoes hitting carpet from the right. More than one. Coming fast, but not panicked. That meant Borowiec still thought he held the shape of the room. He didn't. Leon eased the storage door closed behind them, turned Kacper toward the service stair and said, very quietly, "Stay behind me and do exactly what I say." From the far end of the hall came a voice, low and hard. "There he is." Leon looked once at the long corridor, at the laundry carts, the stacked sheets, the weak bulbs swinging over the tile, and the whole place seemed to narrow around the first man rounding the corner with a hand inside his jacket. Then another voice, from somewhere behind that one, called out a name Leon had not heard in years, not Borowiec's. The count room key in Leon's pocket gave a little cold bite against his leg, and Kacper whispered, almost too low to hear, "Granddad, that's the man who took my case." "Bring it upstairs," Borowiec said, and the line crackled with a smile Leon couldn't see, but could hear just fine. "The ledger, the key, whatever you've got, and do it before I get irritated." Leon kept one hand on the receiver and watched Kacper steady himself against the chair. The boy was pale, but he was listening too. Leon could tell by the way his jaw held. That was the thing about fear. It sharpened people, or it broke them. This one had sharpened him. "You still talking about the book?" Leon asked mildly. A pause, then Borowiec, a little cooler now. "I'm talking about what belongs in the count room. You found it. You bring it." There it was, just a crack. Enough to show Leon where the pressure sat. He glanced at the skinny man on the floor, then at Kacper's wrists, and chose the simplest lie in the world. "I'm already on the move." He hung up before Borowiec could answer. The boy tried to stand, swayed, and Leon caught him at the elbow. "Slow," he said. "Stay on my shoulder when I tell you. Don't talk unless you have to." Kacper gave him a short nod. The raw skin around his wrists had gone angry and red, and the half-light made him look younger than he had in the hall, all bones and grit, and that stubborn chin Leon knew from childhood. Leon reached down, took the hotel pass from the man on the floor, then the key card clipped to it. The man watched him with wet, frightened eyes and didn't try to rise. Good. Some people know when the room has already picked a winner. Leon opened the storage door just enough to listen. Shoes on carpet. One set, maybe two, moving left to right at the far end of the corridor. He waited, then took Kacper out with him and slid them both tight to the wall. The invisible tuner in him was awake now, counting distance, listening for the mistake in the rhythm. A guard rounded the corner with his hand under his jacket. Leon stepped inside the motion before the man could plant his foot. Wrist, elbow, wall. The body bent, the shoulder drove into the plaster, and the air left the guard in one rough grunt. Leon took the badge from his neck, looked at it once, and shoved him into a stack of folded sheets. "Keep moving," he told Kacper. They went down the service stair instead of up. That was the trick. Everybody expected the old man and the boy to run for the roof or the street. Nobody watched the basement because nobody wanted to think about where the hotel hid its dirty work. Leon used the count room key on a narrow door beneath the stairs, and it opened into a cramped office smelling of paper dust, stale coffee, and hot electronics. A bank of screens glowed on the far wall. Stacks of cash sat in neat bands on a metal shelf. A ledger lay open on the desk with names, room numbers, and transfers marked in dark ink. Kacper sucked in a breath. "That's it," he whispered. "That's where they keep the numbers." Leon didn't answer right away. He was already reading the page. The boy's initials were there, written small beside a transfer note. Not erased, not hidden, just filed away, like a thing that could be moved later. The brand under his cuff burned once, a dull, old heat, and he felt the room narrow around that line of ink and paper. There it was again. Not violence, procedure. He found a second sheet under the ledger, folded once, with a timestamp and a room assignment written by hand. Guest Suite 5, audit escort, no outside calls. The handwriting was brisk, expensive, and familiar enough to make Leon's mouth go dry. Then one of the monitors flickered. A corridor feed came up clean and bright, and on it, Leon saw the man in the gray coat from the lower landing. Not in a rush, not worried. He stopped under the camera, looked straight into the lens as if he knew exactly where Leon was standing, and reached into his pocket. Kacper's face changed before Leon even saw the object in the man's hand. "That's him," the boy whispered. "That's the one who took my case." Leon didn't answer the voice on the monitor right away. He watched the gray coat man on the screen lift the cigarette case with 2 fingers, not like a thief, not like a collector either, but like a man putting a label back on a crate. The case flashed once under the camera light. The same dent on the hinge, the same initials Kacper had scratched into it years ago with a coin and a stubborn grin. Then the man folded it into his palm and turned away from the lens, as if he'd already said enough. Kacper made a sound beside Leon, small and sharp, not a word, more like the breath a person takes when he understands the room has finally shown its teeth. Leon set one hand flat on the desk to steady himself. The money-laundering count room smelled of old paper, hot plastic, and the faint electric bite of too many screens running in a closed space. He could feel the brand under his cuff pulse once against the bone, an old warning from a body that had learned long ago to listen before it struck. Not fear, readiness. On the monitor, the gray coat man stopped in the corridor and spoke to someone off-screen. A woman answered back through the speaker system, tinny and impatient. "He's in there," the woman said. "Keep the father quiet." Leon looked at Kacper. "You heard that?" The boy nodded once, jaw tight. "That's not Borowiec's." "No," Leon said. "That's the part that thinks it can still clean up after him." He crossed to the wall of screens and began working the room the way a tuner works a cracked string. One feed showed the corridor outside the lower office. Another showed the service stair. A third was dead except for a rolling gray stripe that told him the cable had been pinched, not cut. He found the control box under the desk, a cheap plastic housing with a cheap lock, and popped it open with the point of the box cutter. Inside, the wiring was a mess of fresh splices and one handwritten tag tied around a relay. Suite 5, lower office, emergency override. Leon almost laughed. Almost. So the hotel was already divided. That made sense. Men like Borowiec always had one door for profit and another for panic. The trick was finding which one they'd chosen for the boy. Leon unplugged the override relay, counted to 3, and plugged it back in a different slot. The nearest corridor camera died for half a second, then came back facing the wrong direction. Enough to confuse a man, not enough to save one. Kacper watched him work with a kind of stunned concentration. "You really are doing this like it's a piano." Leon slid the drawer open and took out a stack of blank hotel forms. "No," he said. "A piano at least tells the truth when it breaks." The intercom in the office crackled. Borowiec's voice this time, too calm to be honest. "Leon, bring the ledger up now, and if the boy is with you, keep him where I can see him." Leon set the forms down on the desk, slowly, and turned toward the speaker. Kacper had gone still at his side. On the nearest monitor, the gray coat man had stopped outside Suite 5 and was listening at the door with the cigarette case in his hand. Then the door to the lower office began to open from the other side. Leon did not waste time on the door. He stepped sideways, put Kacper behind the edge of the filing cabinet, and reached under the desk for the power strip with the same calm hands he used on a piano bridge. The lower office went dim for a blink. Then the monitors on the wall shivered and settled into a darker image. Enough to make the room look ordinary again. Enough to hide motion. The brand under his cuff tightened once as he moved, that old hot thread under the skin, and he used the pull of it the way a man uses a metronome. Borowiec's voice came through the intercom, clipped now. "Leon, answer me." Leon pressed the talk button with one knuckle. "Still fixing your lock." On the main screen, the gray coat man stopped outside the office door and looked straight into the camera, then down at the cigarette case in his hand. Leon saw the small, careful way he turned it, a man checking whether the thing in his palm was still useful. Kacper made a low sound behind the cabinet, half fury, half disbelief. Leon didn't look back. He kept his eyes on the feed and watched the man slip the case into his coat as if it belonged there. Then the office door opened. Not a hard crash, just a slow swing, the kind that makes you think the person on the other side believes he already owns the room. Leon caught the handle with his left hand and stopped it a hand's width short. The gray coat man stood there with one shoulder turned in, a thick knuckle showing from his sleeve, a cheap, neat haircut, and eyes flat as dirty glass. Behind him, in the corridor, another shape shifted near the wall, with something long and dark held low against the thigh. Leon had the first man by the wrist before the man could step through. He turned the joint outward, drove it against the door edge, and felt the small crack of bone give under pressure. The grip loosened. The cigarette case dropped from the man's coat and hit the carpet with a soft metallic click. Leon kicked it under the desk without looking. The second man in the corridor came forward too fast, surprised by the sound, and Leon used the doorway to pin him to the frame with his shoulder. No flourish, just angle, weight, and the narrow truth of a body put in the wrong place. "Who sent you?" Leon asked. The gray-coat man breathed through his teeth and laughed once, thin and ugly. "You already know." That was enough to tell Leon he didn't. Not really. He took the man's lapel, dragged him inside, and shut the door with his heel. The room smelled like hot plastic, spilled toner, and the metallic bite of blood warming on skin. Kacper had come out from behind the cabinet now, one hand clamped over his own mouth. Leon glanced at him and gave a short nod. Stay. Watch. Learn. On the desk, the cigarette case lay open. Inside, instead of cigarettes, there was a folded paper slip tucked under the lining. Leon lifted it with 2 fingers, a room number, a bathhouse locker code, and a handwritten note in the same brisk hand he had seen on the ledgers. Guest Suite 5, bring ledger, boy is leverage. Leon looked at the gray-coat man, then at the note, then at the screen where the corridor camera had gone blind for a second and came back with a red square over one feed, like somebody upstairs had already noticed the shift. The whole building had started to tighten around them. He could hear it now in the vents, in the low thump of the compressors, in the way the intercom clicked twice with no voice behind it. Kacper reached for the desk edge and said very quietly, "Granddad, that's not his hand." Leon turned. "What?" The boy pointed at the note. "That writing. I saw it before, in the spa wing, on a form they kept by the locker room." And then the office phone rang again, but this time the caller ID was blank. And when Leon lifted the receiver, he heard only a breath, a pause, and a woman's voice he had never heard before saying, almost gently, "You're too late for the ledger, Leon. Come to the bathhouse annex if you want the truth." Leon didn't argue with the voice on the phone. He set the receiver down, took Kacper by the shoulder, and moved him out through the service stair while the building started to stir around them. The annex was 2 floors down and half a corridor over, reached by a door that should have been locked, but wasn't. That was the first thing Leon noticed. The second was the smell. Warm stone, wet towels, chlorine, and old mineral water trapped in pipes that had been patched too many times. The spa wing still pretended to be clean, but the seams were everywhere now. A good place to hide a body, a bad place to hide a lie. Kacper stayed close, one hand pressed to the wall when the floor tilted under him. Leon kept him on the inside line, away from the open side of the corridor, and listened. No footsteps behind them, not yet. Just the distant hum of pumps, the drip of water from a cracked valve, and the soft, wrong hush that means people have gone quiet because they are waiting to move first. At the end of the hall sat a row of tiled changing cubicles with frosted glass doors. One had fresh tape on the frame. Another had a laundry basket pushed in front of it like a poor excuse for a barricade. Leon touched the tape, then the frame. Warm, recent. Somebody had passed through here in a hurry, and they wanted the room to look abandoned. That meant the room mattered. Kacper leaned in, breathing hard. "I know this place." Leon glanced at him. "From when?" The boy swallowed. "They brought me through here after the office. I heard water running all the time, and men talking in the room behind the steam wall." Leon nodded once. A steam wall. That made sense. Old hotels liked hidden passages because they dressed up as plumbing. He reached for the taped door, then stopped when he heard the faint metallic tick from the other side. Not a clock. A latch settling under weight. Someone was inside. He pushed the door open just enough to look through the gap, and there it was. A square treatment room with one metal table, a mop bucket, and a wall of stained glass beaded white from the other side. On the table sat a black briefcase, opened neat as a lawyer's grin. Inside were folded papers, a hotel stamp, and a small stack of passport photos clipped together with a rubber band. Kacper sucked in a breath. "That's them. That's the office guys. They were copying faces." Leon took the briefcase in one hand and the photos in the other. Borowec's people, the bathhouse annex, and a tidy little paper route for moving names around when the money got too hot. He could almost hear the machine behind it now, clicking and feeding. Not just laundering, replacing. People, records, rooms, all of it. Then the steam glass trembled. A shadow crossed the other side, slow and broad. Not a guard shape. Bigger. Closer. Leon stepped back and pushed Kacper behind him. The treatment room's side door clicked once, then again. Somebody was trying the handle from the other side, careful as a locksmith. Leon looked at the black briefcase, then at the narrow drain in the tile, and made a choice. He flipped the latch, emptied the papers into Kacper's coat, and shoved the briefcase under the running water from the open sink. The basin filled with a sharp chemical smell, ink blurred on the first page, passport photos stuck together. Good. If the annex had to burn, it would at least burn confused. The door handle turned harder now. Leon moved Kacper toward the back exit, keeping his body between the boy and the glass wall. Then the steam glass fogged from the other side, and a woman's silhouette appeared, close enough to show the shape of her hand lifted against the pane. Not a guard, not Borowiec. Just before Leon could speak, the woman on the other side of the glass said low and very calm, "If you want the truth, you should have come alone." Leon did not look at the woman on the other side of the glass for long. He looked at her hand, the way it rested flat against the pane, fingers spread, nails short, one knuckle taped from an old split. That was the kind of detail that stayed honest when voices did not. The annex room tightened around them. Kacper stayed behind Leon's shoulder, breathing through his mouth, and the warm steam from the wall made the glass sweat until the shapes beyond it blurred. Leon shifted one step to the side so the boy was out of the line of sight from the door behind them. The body learned that sort of thing faster than the mind. "Who are you?" Leon asked. The woman smiled without showing teeth. "The only person in this hotel who still knows where the books went." That was not an answer, and it was one. Leon heard the confidence in it, and the way it sat too evenly in her throat. Not staff, not guard. Somebody who belonged to the paper side of the house, the side that kept the hotel alive when the public room stopped lying well enough. He reached into his coat and closed his fingers around the count room key. The cold metal bit his palm. On the table beside the sink, the black briefcase still sat open with the papers spilled inside the basin. Ink was running in dark ribbons now, and the passport photos had gone soft at the edges, only blurred. That mattered. Kacper leaned closer. "Can she see us?" Leon kept his eyes on the silhouette through the glass. "She can see enough." The woman's hand lifted from the pane. For a second, Leon thought she was going to signal someone outside. Instead, she pointed downward, toward the floor drain, then tapped the glass twice with one knuckle. A direction, a warning, or both. Then the side door behind them opened a crack. Leon turned just enough to see a man's shoe, then the hem of a dark coat, then the glint of a weapon held low and careful. Not rushed. The kind of entry a man uses when he believes the room belongs to him already. Leon stepped in front of Kacper and closed the distance before the man could straighten. His left hand caught the wrist. His right drove the elbow across the inner joint, not hard enough to break, hard enough to deaden the hand. The weapon fell and clattered once against the tile. The man grunted and tried to pull back. Leon used his weight, rolled the wrist, and put the shoulder into the frame of the doorway. Bone and metal met with a sound like a bat striking a pipe. The man folded to one knee, air gone from his chest. Leon took the weapon, checked it, and shoved it under the sink with his foot. Behind the glass, the woman watched without moving. "You still do that too clean," she said. Leon glanced at her now. "You know me?" Her smile faded a little. "I know what they used you for." That was when the radio in the hallway burst to life with a burst of static and a voice Leon did not recognize shouting for the annex doors to be sealed. Footsteps answered immediately outside, fast now, too many for comfort. The hotel had decided. That was useful in its own way. Decisions always narrowed the field. Kacper touched Leon's sleeve. "Granddad, they're coming from the spa stairs too." Leon nodded once and looked at the woman in the glass. "If you know where the books went, then tell me the truth." She held his gaze for one beat, then two, and finally reached into her coat and slid something small into the gap at the bottom of the pane. A folded slip of paper, pushed through the drainage slot with the flat of her finger. On the paper, in sharp blue ink, were 4 words and a room number. Ask for Borowiec's daughter. Then, just as Leon's fingers closed on the slip, the woman stepped back from the glass, and the corridor behind her filled with the shape of someone tall and broad turning toward the annex with a key ring in one hand. And Kacper went rigid beside Leon, because he knew that face too. Leon took the warning and moved at once. He pulled Kacper behind a row of steam-wet lockers, set one palm against the tiled wall, and listened to the annex breathe. Hot water hissed in the pipes. Somewhere deeper in the wing, a valve clicked open and shut. The glass room beside them had turned white with fog, and the shapes beyond it were already losing edges. A good room for hiding, a better room for forcing a mistake. The woman behind the pane watched him with a hard, steady face. "My name is Marta," she said through the slot at the bottom of the glass. "If you want the real books, forget the office upstairs. He keeps the papers in the medical cabinet behind the steam wall." Leon said nothing right away. He looked at the hand pressed flat to the glass, then at the taped seam around the cabinet door. Recent work, recent lies. "Who is he?" Marta's mouth tightened. "The man with the key ring. He seals rooms, moves names, and pretends that makes him useful." Kacper leaned closer to Leon's shoulder and whispered, "He was there. I saw him when they took the case." Leon nodded once. That was enough. The corridor behind the glass was no longer just a corridor. It was a narrow strip of ground where the wrong step could put you in front of a knife, a badge, or a lie. He eased the count room key into his palm and waited. The side door to the annex gave a small, careful click. Then a second one. Somebody on the other side was testing the handle with the patience of a locksmith. Leon turned the steam valve all the way open. White vapor rolled out from the seam, thick and fast, swallowing the lower half of the door and painting the tiles in hot shadow. When the door opened, the man with the key ring stepped in half a pace and blinked into the steam. That was enough. Leon came in low, caught the wrist holding the ring, and drove the arm up and across the doorframe. The man's shoulders struck tile with a hard, dry thud. Leon followed with the elbow, not at the face, never at the face first, but into the side of the neck where the body loses arguments. Air left the man in one ugly burst. The key ring flew free and skittered across the floor under the cabinet. Kacper flinched. Leon felt it, then heard the boy steady himself again. The man tried to shout. Leon turned his head into the steam and slammed him back against the frame. The tiles rang. The grip loosened. Leon took the ring, one key at a time, then checked the man's pockets with 2 short, efficient motions. No drama. A wallet, a radio, a folded slip with a room number and Marta's initials crossed out in blue ink. Interesting. Dirty enough to matter. The man coughed and spat water onto the floor. "Borowiec will." Leon cut him off by pressing the flat of his hand under the jaw and pinning him there. "Borowiec is busy." Marta's voice came from behind the glass, quieter now. "The cabinet. Quick." Leon didn't ask how she knew it was open. He already had the smaller key in the ring and was working the medical cabinet latch before the man on the floor found his legs. Inside were thin folders, carbon copies, and a clipboard wrapped in oilskin. At the back of the cabinet sat a red ledger with the corners bruised from handling. Leon flipped it open and felt Kacper draw a sharp breath beside him. There, on a line marked "Transfer Route," was the boy's name as movement. Kacper's finger touched the page once, then curled away as if the paper burned. "They wrote me out like I was cargo." Leon looked at the line, the stamp, the initials in the margin. Same neat hand as before, same tidy cruelty. He took the whole ledger, then the clipboard, and shoved them into his coat. Then the corridor outside the annex filled with footsteps. Not one pair, several. Fast now, confident. Somebody had decided the room was sealed and the time for politeness was over. Marta's hand slid back onto the pane. "Leon," she said, and for the first time there was something like strain in her voice. "If you want out, use the lower pumping room. And hurry, because my father just reached the door." Leon turned, key ring in one hand, Kacper at his side, and heard the outer handle start to turn. Leon heard the first boot hit the pumping room door and knew the annex was done pretending. He pulled Kacper back from the threshold and shoved him behind a bank of rusted steam pipes. The air down there was hotter, wetter, full of metal taste and old detergent. Condensation slid in long beads over the walls. Somewhere above them, the hotel's main systems groaned like an animal being turned in sleep. Leon kept one hand flat on the pipe and listened for the rhythm through the brand under his cuff, the old body memory that told him how many men were coming before the first one showed his face. 3 sets of footsteps, maybe 4. That meant they thought they already had the room boxed. Kacper whispered, "That's my room." Leon looked at him. "What?" "The one with the bed and the blue curtain. They moved me through here from there." Leon nodded once. The boy was not rattled anymore. He was narrowed down to the facts, and that was better. He reached into his coat, closed his fingers around the ledger, and then at the last second handed the count room key to Kacper. "Take this," he said. "If I tell you to run, you run." The outer door shuddered again. A man's voice came through the metal, low and angry. "Open it!" Leon did not answer. He stepped sideways, took a long steel wrench from the maintenance shelf, and set himself just off the line of the door. No flourish. No speech. The old service had trained him that way, and the years had not made him softer, only slower to waste movement. The handle turned. The latch gave. A shoulder pressed in. Leon hit first. The wrench caught the man across the forearm with a flat crack that stopped the hand before it got to the weapon. Leon followed with the heel of his palm into the throat, not crushing, just collapsing the breath. The man folded into the doorway, choking on air that would not stay put. Leon used the body as a shield for the second man, who had already stepped in with a pistol low and a look of surprise on his face. Leon twisted the first man's shoulders hard into the second, buying half a second, and half a second was enough. The pistol went wide. The shot hit tile and threw white dust from the wall. Kacper flinched, but he stayed behind the pipes. Leon drove forward, caught the pistol wrist, and turned the knuckles up until the fingers opened. The gun dropped. He kicked it under the pipe, then shoved the second man against the wet wall. The man's head struck tile with a dull, ugly thunk. Not enough to kill, enough to make him disappear for a while. The first man had regained his breath and was trying to reach with the good arm. Leon didn't let him. He pressed the wrench under the collarbone and leaned in until the man's knees buckled. The body mechanics were simple. Pressure, angle, timing. That was all it ever was if you knew what you were doing. Then the pumping room door behind them opened again. Not a guard this time. A woman stood there in a dark coat, one hand braced on the frame, face pale under the steam light. Marta, the same woman from behind the glass. She looked past Leon, past Kacper, and saw the men on the floor without blinking. "Good," she said. "You're still alive." Kacper stared at her. "You said the books." Marta gave him a short, tired look. "I said the truth if you came for it." Leon tightened his grip on the wrench. "You sent us here." "I sent you here because Borowiec's already emptied the annex," she said. "He's moving the ledgers again, out through the bathhouse corridor. If you want the papers before he burns them, you need to move now." Leon didn't trust her, not fully, but he trusted the clock. He looked at Kacper, then at the door, then at the man on the floor trying to breathe through a bruised throat. "Can you walk?" he asked the boy. Kacper nodded once, jaw clenched. Leon gave Marta the ledger without taking his eyes off her. "If this is a play, you're in the wrong room." Marta took the book, weighed it in her hand, and said, "I know exactly what room I'm in." Then she looked toward the corridor behind her and went still. Leon heard it a beat later. Shoes. many of them. Coming hard now, not measured. The hotel had shifted from patience to cleanup. Marta's mouth tightened. They found the stair. And from the hall, just before the footsteps reached the pumping room, a man's voice called out Leon's name like he had every right to use it. A voice Leon had not heard in years. Leon did not turn toward the voice. He heard enough in it to know trouble had found a name and put a badge on it. The pumping room was already shrinking around him. Kacper pressed to the wall. Marta stood in the doorway with the ledger in one hand and the look of somebody who had expected the floor to crack years ago and was only surprised it took this long. The footsteps in the corridor kept coming. Not a rush, yet. That was worse. Men who think they can still choose where the violence lands always arrive steady. Leon reached down, closed his fingers around the wrench, and looked at Kacper once. "When I move, you move." The boy nodded. Then the man in the corridor stepped into view. It was not Borowiec, not the father. Older than that. A square face gone gray at the edges, a rain-dark coat, one hand empty and the other carrying a pistol low against the thigh. The kind of man who had learned to wear law like a second skin and never quite took it off, even when the lining had rotted through. Leon knew him from the sound of his boots before he knew his face. "Leon," the man said again, and this time the name came with an old irritation, almost familiar. "I thought you'd be smarter than this." Leon let the wrench hang at his side. "You're early." A thin smile cut the man's mouth. "You're in a bathing annex with a stolen ledger and a boy who doesn't belong to you. I'd call that late." Marta's head turned just enough to measure him. "Inspector," she said under her breath. So that was it. Not a cleaner, not a runner. The sort of man who had been called in to make records disappear cleanly, and then found a better paycheck in making people disappear with them. Behind him, two more figures held the stair landing, one with a shotgun broken short, the other with a baton and a face Leon couldn't have picked out of a crowd. Enough to box the room, not enough to know the room had already changed shape. Leon shifted one foot back, feeling the wet tile, the narrow drain, the low heat from the pipes. "If you're here for the ledger," he said, "you're too late." The inspector's eyes moved to Marta's hands, to Kacper behind the pipe, to the ledger in the woman's grip, then back to Leon. "I'm here because you keep getting in the way of a clean ending." Leon almost laughed. Clean. That word again, used by men who lived off mess. Marta lifted the ledger slightly. "He's not the one who emptied the annex." The inspector's jaw tightened. That was enough for Leon. Anger always showed first in the jaw. He saw the tiny pulse jump there and made his decision. He kicked the drain cover loose. Hot water and old rust burst up from the floor in a sudden white spray. Not enough to drown the room, just enough to blind the landing for a beat and turn tile into a slick sheet. The shotgun man swore and stepped wrong. Leon was already moving, wrench up, shoulder low, body compact. He drove into the first inspector's arm before the pistol could rise, struck the inside of the elbow, and felt the joint give with a dry, bitter snap. The gun went wide. Marta slammed the ledger against the baton man's wrist from the side. Not pretty, just exact, and the baton clattered free. Kacper didn't run. Good boy. Leon took the inspector by the coat front and shoved him backward into the pipe wall. The man hit hard enough to fold, but he kept his feet. Leon felt the old training wake all at once, the invisible tuner in him hearing the room before the room could react. The shotgun man was recovering. Marta had half the landing. Kacper was moving now, finally, to the far end of the room. Then the inspector spat blood and said, with a furious little smile, "You still work too clean for a dead man." Leon leaned in close enough for the man to smell the steam on his coat. "And you still talk too much for one." He drove the wrench down onto the pistol hand. The shot went off anyway, into the steam wall behind Marta. The glass cracked in a bright, branching line, and behind the fracture, something moved inside the hidden cavity, something thin and metal, mounted in the wall, already starting to click into a new position. Marta saw it too late and went still. "Leon," she said, voice gone tight, "that's not a pipe." No, it wasn't. It was a door, and whatever had been waiting behind it had just heard the shot. Leon got them through the narrowing gap in the steam wall just as the panel began to shiver under the first hard impact from outside. The hidden room behind it was not a room in the normal sense. It was a narrow archive space with a concrete floor, metal shelves, and a smell of old paper, hot dust, and machine oil. A red bulb burned over the door. A cassette recorder sat on a desk next to a stack of tapes marked with dates and room numbers. The whole place looked like something built for panic and never meant to be seen by daylight. Kacper stopped short when he saw the shelves. "That's the books." Marta was already inside, one hand on the recorder, the other on a box of files tied with twine. Her face had gone hard in the weak light. "No," she said, "that's the copy of the books, the ones he thought nobody would ever find." Leon closed the archive door behind them and turned the keyring in his palm. Outside, the inspector was still alive, still trying to become a problem. The outer handle jerked once, twice, then stopped. Leon listened through the panel, through the steam, through the old pipes, and heard a boot plant itself on the corridor floor with the weight of a man preparing to force his way in. Marta looked at him. "He'll be here in under a minute." "That's generous," Leon said. She gave a short, tired breath that almost passed for a laugh. Then she reached into her coat and took out a second cassette, smaller, with a handwritten label wrapped around the case. "Backup. Family room." She held it up between two fingers like evidence and shame at the same time. "My father kept this in here for when the hotel needed saving." Kacper looked from her to Leon. "You're Borowiecka's daughter." Marta's jaw tightened. "I am, and if you say that aloud in the corridor, we all die louder." That earned her a look from Leon. He had started to like her in the way he liked tools that could cut and not lie about it. She crouched at the recorder, threaded the tape in with steady fingers, and pushed play. The machine clicked once, then a burst of tape hiss filled the room. Leon leaned over the desk as the first voice came through, low and familiar enough to freeze the air in his chest. Borowiecki, close to the mic, angry, but not yet afraid. "Move the boy through the spa wing tonight. No names, no records. The inspector wants it quiet." Marta went still. Kacper's face changed by a degree Leon had seen before. The kind that comes when a child learns the world has been lying with paperwork. The tape hissed again. Another voice joined in, clipped and controlled, the inspector's voice, and with it the whole rotten machinery of the hotel seemed to step into the room. "Then keep the ledger clean. If Leon shows up, stall him." Leon's hand tightened around the key ring until the metal bit his skin. So that was the shape of it. Not a surprise, not really, just the ugly confirmation of what he had been following through damp corridors and hidden doors. The room had gone quiet except for the recorder and the pounding at the archive panel. Then the tape coughed once, rewound a fraction on a snag, and a third voice came through, a woman's voice, young, close to tears, but trying hard not to crack. "That was the night they took the cigarette case." Kacper made a sharp sound beside Leon, almost a gasp. Marta's face turned toward him, and for the first time all evening, she looked less like Borowiecka's daughter and more like somebody standing in front of a train that had already left the station. Leon heard the outer handle begin to turn again. Not the inspector's hand this time. Bigger, heavier. A man who didn't mind breaking what was left. Marta reached for the recorder and whispered, "If he gets in, take the tape. Don't stop for anything." And behind the wall, in the corridor outside the archive, Borowiecka's voice called out once, thick with fury and recognition. "Leon, open this door!" Leon didn't answer Borowiec. He used the second of silence the way a safer man might use a fence, then motioned Kacper and Marta away from the archive door. "Take only what matters," he said. Kacper had the cassette tape in one hand and the ledger in the other, still breathing like the room had hands around his throat. Marta went to the shelf, grabbed a folded spa map, and tore free a brass key tag tied to a red string. "Lower pumping room," she said. "There's a service chute behind the boiler panel. It leads under the annex. If we stay in the corridor, they'll trap us against the steam wall." Leon slipped the keyring into his pocket and felt the brand under his cuff tighten once, that old cold burn of muscle memory waking before the body did. "Why are you helping us?" Marta looked at him without blinking. "Because the books are bad enough, and because my father has been lying to my face for years." That was not an answer either, but it was close enough. Leon gave the archive a final look, the red bulb, the recorder, the papers gone soft with steam, and then set his hand on the boiler panel Marta pointed to. The metal was hot enough to sting through his sleeve. He pulled. The panel gave after a hard, ugly scrape, and a narrow service chute opened behind it, lined with old insulation that smelled of rust and wet wool. Kacper swallowed. "That's where they took me." Leon nodded. "Then we use it." The crawl through the chute was tight, low, and mean. Leon went first, one shoulder scraping concrete, one palm testing each ledge before he trusted it. Water dripped from the insulation in cold, regular taps. The unseen machinery of the spa throbbed all around them, pumps and valves and the old pipes coughing in their sleeves. That was the thing about a building like this. It never stopped talking. If you were the invisible tuner, you could hear where it lied. Behind them, Borowiec hammered once on the archive side, then again, and Marta shut the panel with both hands. The sound fell away fast, swallowed by tile and pipe. Leon kept moving until the chute opened into a lower maintenance room, lit by a single bare bulb. A wall of stacked towels leaned beside a rusted sink. An old wall phone hung on the side of the boiler cabinet, its receiver swinging slowly as if somebody had just left it. It rang once. No one touched it. The room went quiet except for the phone and the wet rattle of a loose pipe. Marta stepped forward, took the receiver, listened for half a beat, and set it back with a face gone even harder than before. "Administration corridor," she said. "They know you're coming. And they've already moved the inspector to the office." Kacper looked up. "The inspector is here?" Marta nodded. "And Borowiec is on his way down. My father's done pretending this is still a hotel." Leon took the spa map from her, spread it on the sink, and saw the route in one glance. Red pencil marks. Service lift. Administration corridor. Inspector's office. A maintenance stair that ran behind the laundry wall and came up near the records room. A clean route, if you trusted paper. Leon never trusted paper, but he trusted pressure. The whole wing was built around one narrow spine, and if you knew where it bent, you could break it. He folded the map once and put it in his coat. Then Marta reached into her inner pocket and pulled out a key card with a silver clip. "Use this," she said. "It opens the admin side. My father thinks it only opens from his office." Leon looked at the card, then at her. "And you?" Marta's mouth twitched. "I'll keep him busy long enough to hate me for it later." Kacper gave her a strange look, half relief and half distrust, and Leon almost told him not to trust anyone in this hotel. But that would have been too easy. He just turned toward the wall of boilers, set one hand on the service hatch, and listened. Up above them, somewhere beyond tile and steam and a locked corridor, came the soft, unmistakable whir of a lift starting to move. Then it stopped, and from inside the shaft, a man spoke very quietly, as if he already knew who was standing below him. Leon did not move when the voice below the shaft went quiet. He listened instead to the lift breathing metal against metal, to the thin scrape of a cable settling under load, to the faint vibration in the floor that told him somebody was climbing from below, not above. Kacper stayed tucked behind the boiler cabinet, ledger pressed to his chest. Marta had gone pale, but she hadn't stepped back. She stood with the spa map in one hand and the cassette tape in the other, her father's daughter long enough to know when a room had already picked a side. The service hatch gave a slow knock, then another, and the same voice Leon had heard in the shaft spoke again, closer now. "Leon, I know you can hear me." That tone. Not Borowiec, not the inspector. Somebody from the old side of the hotel, the side that had survived by keeping its head down and its hands dirty. Leon turned the keyring once in his palm and looked at Marta. "Back exit?" he asked. She pointed toward the boiler wall without speaking. He moved first, not because he was brave, but because the room was about to become smaller. The boiler hatch opened into a low-maintenance run lined with old pipes and rusted brackets. Heat hit him in a damp wave, carrying a smell of burnt dust and mineral scale. Kacper followed close. Marta came last, locking the hatch behind them with a wrench she took from a hook by the wall. That bought them seconds, maybe less. The corridor beyond the hatch ran at a slope and ended in a laundry wall. Leon had the count room key in his fist and the brand under his cuff pulling sharp against his skin, that old warning in the body that said the next 10 steps mattered more than the last 10 minutes. He kept one hand on the pipe to feel a vibration through the metal, listening for the hotel's rhythm, the pumps, the lift, the footfalls. It all came in pieces, but pieces were enough. Marta shoved open the laundry wall and pointed through the hanging sheets. "Records corridor, then the office." Leon looked through the slit. 2 men stood in the records hall with short batons and open jackets, scanning the steam, enough to make him work. He took the wrench from his coat, stepped through the sheets, and used the first man's wrist against the corner of the filing shelf. The joint folded wrong with a wet pop. The man dropped to his knees, staring at his hand as if it belonged to somebody else. The second turned fast. Leon drove the wrench up under the chin. Not a kill shot, just a pressure strike that shut the throat and took the legs with it. He went down on his side, coughing hard and clawing at his neck. Kacper stared, breathing shallow. Leon kept him behind his shoulder and kept moving. The records corridor opened into the administration wing, where the carpet was thicker and the walls smelled like old varnish and fear. On the far end, the office door stood half open. Light spilled through in a pale strip. Leon saw the edge of a desk, a phone off the hook, and papers scattered across the floor like somebody had tried to empty the room in a hurry. Marta stopped beside him. "There," she whispered. "That's where my father keeps the copies." Leon looked up at the ceiling panel above the office door. A hairline crack crossed the plaster. Fresh. It hadn't been there before. Somebody had gone through the walls, or behind them, or both. He nodded once. "Stay low." Then the office light went out. Not a blackout, just one room. One deliberate cut. Leon felt the hair on his forearm rise. A man who can kill the light in one room knows the room better than the people in it. From the dark office came a soft metallic click, then the sound of a drawer opening. And Borowiec's voice, calm as a knife laid on a table, said, "You should have left when I offered." Leon did not wait for the rest of Borowiec's sentence. He crossed the office in 2 quiet steps, took the edge of the desk with his left hand, and drove the heel of his right palm into the lamp switch. The room fell into a smaller darkness, only the weak spill from the corridor and the red blink of the desk phone keeping the shapes alive. Borowiec was still behind the desk, one hand hovering near the drawer, the other flat on a stack of papers as if paper could still protect him. Kacper and Marta held back by the doorway. Leon did not look at them yet. He kept his eyes on Borowiec's wrists. "You've got a bad habit," Leon said. "You keep offering things you don't own." Borowiec's mouth tightened. "I own enough to bury you." "That's the problem. You believe the room answers to you." He went over the desk then, not fast, just exact. His fingers caught Borowiec's right wrist before the man could move it. Leon turned it palm down, pressed it hard into the wood, and felt the tendons go rigid under his thumb. Borowiec hissed through his teeth and tried to pull free, but Leon shifted his weight, locked the elbow, and took the joint past the point where pride still mattered. Not a break, a warning. The hand opened anyway. A small metal remote dropped onto the papers. Marta's eyes went straight to it. "What does that trigger?" Borowiec smiled with the wrong side of his mouth. "The part of the hotel you didn't see." Leon heard the click before anyone moved. Somewhere in the wall behind the portrait of the spa gardens, a latch released. The framed print swung inward on hidden hinges and showed a narrow steel door with a turnwheel lock and a key slot blackened by use. Cold air breathed out of the crack, carrying paper dust and something sour underneath it, like old tape left in heat. Kacper made a low sound. "That's where they took me." Leon took the remote from the desk, slipped it into his coat, and nodded once toward the door. "Then that's where we go." Borowiec shifted in Leon's grip, trying to force his shoulder free. Leon leaned closer and spoke just above the man's ear, calm as a man describing a tune. "You can save your breath. The inspector already knows you're finished. Marta already knows your books, and your father's about to learn what sort of daughter he raised." That last line hit. Leon felt it in the wrist first. The fight left Borowiec's hand, not all at once, but enough. Marta moved past Kacper and knelt by the steel door. A key ring was hanging from the turnwheel, one of the small tags stamped with the hotel seal. She took it, fitted the key, and looked back at Leon with a face that had gone pale at the edges. "There's a room inside," she said. "Not for guests." "Show me." The lock turned with a thick, greasy sound. The steel door swung inward on a concealed hinge and opened onto a tight chamber lit by one bare bulb. Shelves of cassette tapes, bundles of ledgers, envelope sleeves stacked in boxes, and on the desk at the far end, laid out in a neat row, as if somebody had prepared it for an evidence photo, sat a folder stamped with the inspector's seal and a fountain pen still uncapped. Kacper stared into the room. That's all of it." Marta's voice came out flat. "No, that's the part he was saving." Leon stepped inside and saw the labels on the tapes. Guest Suite 5, Spa Wing, Family Room, Inspector's Calls. One cassette on top had a white strip around it, and in careful block letters someone had written only 2 words, "For Leon." He did not touch it yet. He looked instead at the fountain pen, the folder, the cold steel of the room, and the old brand under his cuff began to burn like it remembered every ugly corridor in the building. The archive, the annex, the office, all of it suddenly made a terrible kind of sense. This was the real machine, not the hotel, the room behind the wall. Then the desk phone inside the chamber rang once. Not the office line, not the corridor, the hidden line. Marta froze. Borowiec, still held against the desk in the outer office, went white. And from the receiver in the steel room came a voice Leon knew too well to mistake. The inspector, speaking softly, as if he had already been listening for a long time. Leon picked up the phone in the hidden room and set it on the desk between the folders and the tape recorder. "Keep talking," he said. The inspector stayed silent for a beat long enough to make the room feel smaller. Then came a breath, a shift of fabric, the thin scrape of a shoe on corridor carpet. Leon could picture him out there without seeing him. Not hurried, not calm either. A man who had spent too many years deciding which doors stayed shut. Leon pressed the cassette tape Marta had handed him into the recorder and hit play. The machine clicked, caught, and filled the room with a thin ribbon of hiss. Marta leaned in. Kacper stayed behind Leon's shoulder, eyes fixed on the desk. The folder stamped with the inspector's seal lay open under the lamp, and the first page inside was already a confession shape without the words. Names, dates, room numbers, the kind of paper that makes a clean man dirty just by touching it. The inspector's voice came through the phone again, lower now, less certain. "What are you doing?" Leon looked at the recording light and answered, "Saving time." That got a hard inhale on the line. Then the inspector started to calculate. Leon heard it in the pause before the next sentence, the little machine click in a man's head when he understands that he has stepped into his own trap. "If you have the boy, bring him out. I can still make this simple." "No," Leon said. "You can still make it true." He kept the line open and turned the volume up with 2 fingers. Through the hiss, the inspector tried a different tone, the one men use when they think a promise can still outrun a tape. He talked about procedure, about misunderstandings, about how much easier things would be if no one forced a public scene. Leon let him talk. The brand under his cuff burned once, then again, a dry, old warning. He had heard this voice before in other corridors, in other years, when the system still pretended its rot was temporary. Marta took the phone from him and held it steady beside the recorder, her jaw tight. She said nothing. She did not need to. The inspector kept speaking because silence had become expensive. Leon moved to the desk and picked up the top page in the folder. It was a list of transfers, names, and sealed room codes. Right there in the margin, under one date, was a note written in a smaller, neater hand. For Leon. He turned the page over and found another sheet clipped behind it. A witness statement, unsigned, blank at the bottom, with a fountain pen already waiting beside the line. His eyes went to the pen, then to Kacper. The boy looked at the paper like it might bite him. "That's his desk?" Kacper asked. Leon nodded. And his mistake. From the phone, the inspector's breathing changed. Faster now, not from fear of Leon, from fear of the room behind Leon. He had heard something in the background, something new. Leon heard it too a second later, a hard strike of metal against metal outside the hidden room, followed by the low, annoyed bark of a man giving orders. Not Borowiec this time. The inspector had brought other company. Marta looked toward the steel door and went pale. "That's not mine." Leon set the folder down slowly and listened to the corridor beyond the wall. One set of boots, then another, then a third, heavier, dragging slightly as if a weapon was being carried wrong. The hotel had decided to close the gap. The inspector's voice on the line had gone thin. "Leon, don't open that door." Leon looked at the steel panel, then at the blinking recorder, then at Kacper and Marta standing under the dead lamp, and understood something with a cold, clean clarity. The confession was already theirs. The room was already the evidence. What came through the door next would only decide how loud the ending got. And then the outer lock turned from the other side. Leon took the inspector's call from the hidden office and held the receiver so close he could hear the man's breathing between the words. The page on the desk was already signed by Leon. The pen had written clean and steady, the same careful hand he used on tuning pins when the room needed to come back into tune. He had set the confession down on the inspector's desk exactly where the lamp made the ink shine, then pushed the recorder toward it and let the tape keep rolling. Borowiec's voice, the inspector's voice, the whole hotel's rotten little chorus was all in there now, trapped on the spool like flies in amber. "You can still stop this," the inspector said. Leon looked across the desk at Kacper, then at Marta standing by the door with her father's key ring in her fist. "No," he said. "I can only decide where it lands." The hidden office trembled with a blunt udar from the corridor. Not a breach yet, a warning. Somebody on the other side had found the steel door and was leaning on it with a shoulder and a bad temper. Marta glanced up, hard and pale. Kacper stayed very still, one hand resting on the folder as if he could pin the whole hotel down by touching paper. Then the outer handle turned again. Borowiec came in first, and the sight of him made the room go colder. His jacket was unbuttoned, his face slick with sweat, and for the first time Leon saw him without the polish. Not a boss, not a man in control. Just a tired animal in a nice coat with too many hands touching him from the wrong directions. Behind him, half in the corridor light, the inspector hovered with his good wrist tucked tight against his side. Borowiec looked straight at Marta, You gave them the books? Marta didn't blink. I gave them the truth. That hit him harder than any blow. Leon saw it in the tiny collapse at the corner of Borowiec's mouth. Not fear yet, something worse. Disbelief. The kind of wound that does not bleed visibly, but keeps a man from standing straight. The inspector tried to step in, and Leon lifted the key ring between two fingers. Don't. The inspector froze. He knew that look. He knew the room had already been emptied of his future. From somewhere outside the office came a rapid set of footsteps, then another, and then the first thin wail of a siren from the street below. Marta's face changed when she heard it. Not relief, not quite. Just the hard set of a person who had finally called the consequence and now had to live in the same room with it. Borowiec heard the siren too. He looked past Leon, past the desk, toward the hidden room's steel door, and then at his daughter. Marta. She cut him off. Don't use my name. Leon reached down, took the confession from the desk, and placed it flat under the lamp. Then he moved the recorder beside it, both items sitting together like a pair of stubborn witnesses. There, he said. Now it's all in one place. The inspector tried for one last smile. It came out thin and wrong. You think this ends with a badge and a siren? Leon shook his head. No, I think it ends with paper. He stepped back, and that was when the office door behind Borowiec burst open to a wash of blue light. Uniforms filled the corridor. Not clean men, not friendly men, just officers coming fast because the evidence had gone louder than the hotel could lie. Borowiec made one sharp move toward the side corridor, but Marta stepped into his path and threw the key ring down at his feet. He stopped. That was the real end for him, not the cuffs, the stop. Leon watched the officers close in, watched the inspector's face drain to something almost blank, and felt the old tightness in his chest ease one notch at a time. Kacper had reached for the engraved cigarette case on the desk and slipped it into his coat pocket. No ceremony, just possession returned to the right hands. The wisdom in it was simple enough to live with. A room can hold its breath for years, but once the wall opens and the light finds the dust, the lie starts showing itself everywhere. By the time Leon crossed the lobby, the fern by the window had turned toward the morning glass. Snowmelt from the awning dripped black and slow onto the steps outside. He kept walking with Kacper beside him, collar up, cuff unhidden, and did not look back at the hotel once. If you want more hard-edged stories like this, stay close to the channel and subscribe.